There's 150, 200 people in a room all chanting Hail Elaroth, Hail Elaroth, and understanding the, let's call the mechanics, or as they would say, the technology behind his rituals. He is essentially feeding off of these people. Elaroth is essentially worshiping him, Sebastian. So where a lot of people bristle at the idea of, is Sabretooth Clan a personality cult devoted to Sebastian? Yeah, it is. And you have the books right there to show you, and I would know because I wrote half the damn book, What he did was he took the work and the sacrifice that these men put together, slapped a trademark on it, and ran for the hills in order to make money and to generate this sort of personality cult as we understand it today. In his own words, what he told me, he said he created a paradigm by which people who have this sort of arch libertarian, almost quasi-fascist mindset could exploit people and then have an excuse by which to do so. Money, capital, power, finance takes all sorts of precedent over any of Sebastian's personal and intimate connections, if he's even capable of making any. He has this predatory dynamic. People were claiming that he had got up on me. I'm like, no, but I understand why. Because if people know how he was and how he is, it's easy to make that assumption, especially because of the close proximity of how I was working with him. They're so deep now that they can't give it up. He can't come forward and say, I'm sorry for everything I've done. Everything I taught you was lies. It would be very psychologically debilitating to a lot of people who have made this entire paradigm their whole life, not a lifestyle. They've really made it their whole life.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow. What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast platforms and you want to see our guest's amazing outfit today, you're going to want to go to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness so you can join in on the conversation as well. Our community here is incredible. We so appreciate you guys and all of the kind things that you say for our guests, to our guests. They are real people telling their stories, and so it means the world. In fact, today's guest was someone who commented, and that's how he ended up on the show. He was getting threats by the people that we were exposing for just commenting on one of our videos. So I'm really interested to talk to him. We are going back to the Father Sebastian story, the Vampyrism, the cult that he essentially started and is exploiting people through, exploiting them with labor, SA, lots of different things that we have covered from our female guests, and we will definitely link those interviews. But today we're hearing from a male perspective and the New York perspective. So thank you so much for joining us, Vincent.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be on.
Do you remember your exact comment that you left on our video or what you said?
Well, I was previously employed, contractually to Sebastian Todd from a period of about, let's say, 3 or 4 years. I had met him, and anybody who tunes in from New York or is familiar with the New York City scene will definitely pick up on this or know what I'm talking about. I was working at a Halloween store, a famous costume shop in East Village, Union Square area, where he used to do the fangs at, where he used to make the acrylic fangs that he makes for the community. I had a previous run-in with him the year before. So this was in 2017. 2016, I had ran into him, my first time meeting him. And 2017, he comes back to the city again. I was maybe a couple months shy of my 19th birthday. I was going through some housing insecurities. I'm a teenage runaway. So I have no present, biological family. Most people are deceased to have moved away. So I came into the vampire lifestyle subculture very young. I was about 16 years old. 16 to about 18 was the general age that most people would come to discover the in-person aspects of the community, because between the late 90s, early 2000s, it wasn't the online phenomenon that it is now, where you have Facebook groups and websites and forums and chat rooms, these sorts of things. Back then, you had to know people, you had to be around, or for most of us, especially a lot of us who lived uptown, you had a relative or a family friend or somebody who was into it. For me, it was actually my father, who had a long-standing background in the New York City club underground. So we basically got to know everybody, and I grew up around many different club figures and personalities. It wasn't, it didn't mean anything big to me because these were people who were all in the glitz and glamour, but they were also eating off of identity. So I didn't have that what you call the celebrity syndrome, the ooh ah type of starstruck mentality.
Yeah, I want to rewind a little bit because I know we were getting to the comment, but I think this is important to learn more of the context of your past. So let's just go back a little bit though and talk more about your family dynamic and what led you to joining the group.
Sure. So I should make a distinction that what I've chosen to call, given like a quasi sociological term, the broader vampire lifestyle subculture has very distinct factions. What the group that we're speaking about today, that they call now the Sabertooth Clan, I think is the way they orient it now, because they tend to swap the words around. This is Sebastian Todd's Father Sebastian's personal group that he and some others had created in the late 90s, and then he just took the work and ran off to the West Coast and turned it into some kind of personality cult. This came out of a pre-existing vampire lifestyle subculture that already existed here in New York City, going as far back to the late 1970s or thereabouts. So the sort of factionalism and certain terminology may not come across a certain way. Other people may not understand it. Other people may have different interpretations of history. I can only speak from the perspective of New York City, so far as history and what I've experienced, and my experience working with Father Sebastian personally.
Yeah.
When it comes to any other outside, yeah, because you have communities, for example, in New Orleans, you have them in other major cities. Of course, he has Los Angeles. There's apparently a squad out there in Vegas now, and there's even people in Europe and other continents. I was actually briefly interacting with the Japanese vampire community until Lord Taiki of Osaka had passed away in 2021. I was actually the one that broke the news to people in the United States who had no idea who the hell I was talking about. And this man has a longer reputation than even people here. So it's
Yeah.
very connected and it's very disconnected all at the same time. I don't think there's any other subculture that really exists like that. It's so contradictory. It's mind-boggling to think about.
Yeah. So walk me through what your childhood looked like as far as how it informed your choices as a teen later on.
Well, on the one hand, I had something of a privileged upbringing, not necessarily in a financial sense. I came from a working class Afro Latino background. My father is a single parent. My father was deeply involved, as I said before, in the New York City club underground from about the mid to late 1970s to the late 90s or early 2000s. After that, he just kind of gave up and got a bogus construction job like every other Latino parolee or ex-felon. My childhood in and of itself wasn't great. On the one hand, my father was very abusive, neglectful household. On the flip side, I had a upbringing that was inconceivable for anybody from my background or generation, because he was a member of a number of very famous and groundbreaking New York City countercultural groups, the most prominent of which we know is the Universal Zulu Nation, which is a hip hop cultural advocacy organization, which is embroiled in its own very similar controversy to this. That's since been handled, of course. But so at the same time where we may be going a couple months without light or dealing with empty fridges and whatever, I'm being taken to, even being pulled out of school to go to art galleries, Maisel Cinema, Zulu anniversaries at the Magic Theater on West 125th Street. And there's pictures of me in like the New York Times at 12 years old with iced tea and cocoa or Fat Joe. And it's crazy. So again, I don't have that starstruck sort of thing because the celebrity influence was always around. He had photo albums. He had, what do you call these things? I'm too young for this. The Rolodexes full of numbers and cell and beeper. I'm like, Dad, what's a beeper? Of like club kids, Michael Alec, Amanda Lepore, Walt Paper, these sorts of people. That he worked with, including a lot of the early hip hoppers, that were DJs. In hip hop culture, not to deviate, but in hip hop culture, they have 4 pillars of what they consider, which is MCing, DJing, graffiti, aerosol art, and breakdancing. All we know is b-boying. So all of the people who come from those 4 elements were just around everywhere, and we were attending all these events and filming documentaries, getting in magazines, newspapers. And because of the impact that the Zulu Nation had on music in and of itself, music and New York City culture, we were really able to interact, and he was really for his time to interact with every other subculture and every other tradition that came out of that. The Zulu Nation came out of the street gangs of the 1970s, which a number of documentaries profile that. For example, Rebel Kings, that was filmed in 2015. And there's actually a lot of interesting parallels with what we understand in New York City as the vampire subculture, or the vampire court system as it exists, where a lot of the houses really sort of operated on a sort of a gang mentality. They had turf. They didn't have colors, or what we call cuts, which is a vest like this with the patches and whatnot. They all had these different ankhs, for example. I noticed that the other two ladies, I'm not sure if they had theirs, but every house in New York City has a different sort of design. So, for example, I wear this one, which is known as the Sanguinarium ankh. This was very, cheaply made. It was released in some books that were published at that time. It was made out of like pewter or something that would always break right around this part. I was obviously too young. So when I asked for mine, when I felt like I made my bones and the elders at the time had agreed, they had mine cast in silver, sterling silver. And I still wear it to this day, with a varying degree of pride, because at one point in time, the subculture really did, the scene rather, here in New York as we know it, did have as much of an impact and had the potential, which I feel now has sort of fallen to the wayside, but once upon a time had the very same groundbreaking potential as the countercultures that I feel, and I've done enough research to kind of prove, came out of what had already existed before. You can actually trace a line from, so we call the city collectively, call it Gotham, right? In Sebastian's lore, he calls it Gotham Halo, and the halo is some kind of quasi metaphysical term, but we just refer to it as Gotham. You can actually trace a line from Gotham back to the Club Kids, which, by the way, both subcultures started in Limelight, the infamous Limelight Club in Chelsea on 20th Street, back through house music. And house music, of course, came out of Latin freestyle and hip hop. Now, it's a kind of a long bow to insist to people who kind of have this sort of Gothic subcultural look that they come out of their very same kind of hip hop, or the quote unquote street culture that they try to, avoid or try to disassociate themselves from. But the way I put it is that, Bambaataa, Kool Herc, and the DJs, the Zulu Nation ran so the vampires could fly. And unfortunately, since, the way the subculture has gone out, they kind of crashed and burned somewhere along the way.
Something that you had mentioned to me previously is how these groups that your father came from, these really powerful, intense groups, had a different view on what community was supposed to be, and how the subculture of vampirism in New York was kind of paved in a way to, I don't know if intentionally is the right word, but to exploit people when it came down to it. It was just set up differently. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. For starters, and when I say hip hop culture, if I use this term, it's not referring strictly to the music. It's referring to that foundation that the Zulu Nation and other subsequent organizations came out with. So for us, from that background, the words community and family are interchangeable. And that kind of alienates a lot of people, because everybody places boundaries in their own personal lives in different places. Because just as much as I was being taken to, Maisel Cinema, Gaucho's Gym, or art galleries, coming home in taxi cabs 3 o'clock in the morning, the very next week we would be in Yankee Stadium, putting together a food drive, canned food drive, or we will be at the 48th precinct in the South Bronx, hosting a Christmas toy drive for the community and these sorts of things. And that was collectively what was a part of what we consider to be that groundbreaking hip hop culture. The Zulu Nation itself came out of a truce of sorts that that occurred between the gangs in the 1970s, and the block parties was what developed the genre of music. But it was only that unity and that family aspect, particularly when people were becoming more politically conscious with respect to the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, African Pioneer Movement, and so on, that had a very strong influence on the Zulu Nation and on many of its leaders. as well as another gang called the Ghetto Brothers, which was very popular, well known in that time, where you would see a particular Black and Latin unity where about 10 years prior, one person walking into another neighborhood might lose their life. So, family to us, we didn't have the sort of teenage runaway epidemic or the chronic homelessness epidemic that we see, particularly amongst young people of color now. You can still go to subway stations, particularly in the Midtown area where I previously lived, and you would find people as young as 15, 16 sleeping outside. You can go to the Christopher Street Piers and you could see, very young trans women engaged in sex work and so on and so forth. That didn't exist in hip hop culture. The refrain, the mantra that we had was peace, love, unity, and having fun. That was what, anytime people ask you what hip hop meant, you didn't hear anything about music or scratching turntables or spinning on one's head. It was those things came after, because it was those four principles that allowed us to do all those things and export a culture that started here all the way around the world. The point being, at that time, we had far more limited resources back then, because in the 70s and 80s, we were still living in regions where, like, the Bronx was burning. You would see swaths of blocks, city blocks of lots, because the landlords would burn down the buildings to collect the insurance money and then move away and leave everybody else, hanging in the dust. So if one person was lucky enough to have a safe place to live, whether this was a gang leader or some kind of political, individual, or just whomever, it could have been, a young kid living with their mama or whoever, and you would have 6, 7, 8 young people who didn't have anywhere else to go, and they had somewhere safe to be, they had somewhere safe to sleep. I use the term counterculture rather than subculture because these cultures came out of something prior, and it was all a rejection of what was coming out before. You look at the 80s, for example, you look at films like American Psycho, which is a perfect encapsulation of the neoliberal capitalist mindset of the 1980s, where there was the haves and have-nots. We were perpetually the have-nots, and whatever little bit that we had to give, we gave, and we didn't make excuses. We didn't hold it against people. It was, we had to do something for ourselves because the world itself was trying to erase us. And we had big fun being there for our people. This is something
Yeah.
that's very much lost in modern day subcultures, where there are people within the vampire scene today who are still struggling. And because of the vampire ideology, as has been put forward in Sebastian's writings, regardless of allegations of plagiarism or ghostwriting or whatever. The fact of the matter is, the man's name is still on the books. If you look at some of what he promotes, the cult of one, the self. You find this term repeated: the self, the self, the self, and it's always about doing for oneself to the detriment of everyone else. How do you build a community based on doing for self? That's the one conundrum of this entire subculture. And nobody to this day has been able to answer this question for me. And I've been here since I was 16 years old.
Yeah, let's talk about how you became this runaway and how you joined this community. So, what was it that drove you to do that?
So my father had a brief interaction with the vampire community in the mid and late 80s. This was way before Sebastian came on the scene. There was a man who started something called the Vampyre Theater. Vampire spelled with a Y. And this was a sort of avant-garde theater troupe that was active in the East Village between about 89 and, let's say, 94. In fact, some of Sebastian's earlier mentors, who he selectively rewrites history to not include them, actually come out of this vampire theater. And in fact, some present day left-hand path type community individuals still are active that came out of that organization. Then when the vampire scene as we understand it today came out from Sebastian's works, the works of people such as Raphael Osiris, with whom he started the what was initially called Clan Sabretooth. That's why I kind of get confused with the terminology now. Clan Sabretooth was the actual organization. It was intended to be that so-called family structure way before, Sebastian started seeing the receipts and realizing he could turn this into, Scientology for vampires. It was also largely based out of the Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game. So the idea of clans and covens and whatever, it was the idea of creating little units that one could lead around for, various ego tripping purposes. There was another gentleman who a lot of my online fan club right now get into a tizzy when I mention a gentleman by the name of Vincent Orion, who was Sebastian's original, compatriot in building the network as we understand it today. At one point, it was called the Sanguinarium. The Sanguinarium was the vampire culture that was exported from New York to other cities and other states between 98 and about 2005 or so. What he did was he took the work and the sacrifice that these men put together, slapped a trademark on it, and ran for the hills in order to make money and to generate this sort of personality cult as we understand it today. Because in his own words, what he told me on the phone, and we'll get to how, that intimacy had begun to develop, he said he created a paradigm by which people who have this sort of arch libertarian, almost quasi-fascist mindset could exploit people and then have an excuse by which to do so. So whether that ranged from just the general run-of-the-mill New York City nightclub sexual deviancy to literally creating a personality cult where they worship you as a god. And we could definitely take a moment to get into some of the more recent books and publications so I can actually, prove that point, which I know I've seen some of the comments on the previous video. One particularly stuck out to me, a woman who said that she's, I think, a stay-at-home mom from the Midwest. She's never heard anything like this. Do I have a surprise for you? It's going to make it worse before it gets better. So this is my upbringing. This is my background. I can't say my father and my family, my uncles and cousins, whoever, were not one scene or one culture, because all of the cultures, as I described before, they kind of overlap, they intersect, one flows from another. When one petered out, one might be coming up, and it's like, oh, let's go check out this thing. So hip hop gave way to Latin freestyle. Now you're watching, George Lamond or TKA perform at Club Exit. That gives way to the club kids. Now you're going downtown to Chelsea, to Limelight, to Twilo, these sorts of Twilo rather, these sorts of places. And then finally, the vampire scene comes up again in the mid 90s. So now my father, who's significantly older, is now looking at, who's these young kids trying to do this vampire stuff again? We already been there, done that. But what Sebastian, to his credit, depending on how much work he actually did versus just taking it from other people, actually did sort of set the mold or set a trend or whatever in this community court psychobabble that he created. And that was a significant part of my upbringing. I was the coolest kid on the block because I was in pre-K, 2001, being picked up, at dismissal from my father in like full regalia, makeup, contacts, fangs, trench coat, all the jewelry. And it's like September. It's like 76 degrees outside, and everybody, oh my God, is that your father? And is that, and I'm like, I'm 4 and I'm loving this. So, but again, because I will give proper respect and of course to my upbringing and whatever. And I'm very thankful for the upbringing I had, despite the fact that my father may not have been the best parent in the house. And that's subsequently what led to me leaving. We lost our apartment in 2014. He had some kind of mental break. He moves in with this woman out of state. And I didn't care for packing up and leaving the life that I left behind. Now, what life is that? Because I'm like, 15, but I had friends, I had something, I've never lived anywhere else besides the Bronx. I look at it this way. You know how they send astronauts to the International Space Station after 6 months, their muscles start to degenerate and atrophy and whatever. And the further away you move from the atmosphere, the more health issues you have. I think if you were to take me out of the Bronx, out of New York City, I would start wasting away and probably die. But New York culture is like, it's literally in my blood. I was born and raised in this. So I had these memories, very faint memories. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was into this kind of stuff. I believe she says something to the effect of having seen Sebastian at some Comic-Con type of convention, and being very enamored with the whole glitz and glamour and the girls in the outfits and this sort of thing. We were young, emo kids in the mall. This is the kind of superficial stuff we gravitated towards. We started a little organization in the library, in the local library on Vice Avenue. And it was just it was me and her and a bunch of street urchins. And we called it the Primordial Black Dragons. And then we chose the name House Forsaken. We were trying to pass ourselves off as a house because for all we knew, the Gotham community was no longer functioning. So we kind of thought, well, we'll just do whatever we want. There's no elders to tell us anything anymore. And that was not correct. Come to find out, I made so much noise in that library that the contemporaries, the latter day people of Gotham, the current elders, went and sent scouts into the library to try to figure out who the hell is this kid talking all this stuff. He's got all the lingo down, all the terminology, all the hand signs and all the secret stuff. Who are you? Like, we have children your age. We have nieces and nephews your age. Who is this guy? Who is this kid? And I believe May 2016, I was invited to an event called Haven, which was the actual resurrection of the Gotham scene. Gotham itself had sort of atrophied in about 2010. There was nothing active from that point until late 2015, early 2016, which is when I started, rabble rousing in these libraries in the Bronx. It was all adults. I was the youngest person there. I believe I had just turned 18 or a few months shy of turning 18. And I'm surrounded by these wonderful, wonderful looking people, men and women, the ladies all dressed, decked out, these whalebone corsets and the makeup, the fangs, and all this kind of extra glitz and glamour. And I'm here because I was already homeless. I had left in 2014. I was on the streets of New York City up until that time. I kind of skipped over that. I apologize. I'm here with like this ratty hair down to here, a black Gears of War beanie, and like an oversized leather coat, like on the Crow type of level that I had literally fished out of the garbage and cleaned off. I looked ridiculous. Not to mention the little scarecrow plastic fang that you buy in the Halloween store in Party City or what have you. I'm trying so hard to kind of catch up with them and whatever. And I do, unfortunately, have a picture of me like this when I had first met Sebastian Todd later that same year. I've never had any shame in my struggle. Like, yes, I have housing insecurities. I have health issues as a result of those perpetual housing insecurities. And this is kind of what, this is how I came up, because when you come into any subculture this young, there's a major issue where you don't have a normal upbringing. You don't have a normal early adulthood or teenage years. I was just coming out of the closet at the time. I couldn't do that normally. I could not develop for as much as they claim to promote sovereignty and individuality. I could not develop a sovereign and individual personality or discover myself, if you will, because everything that I became was essentially their creation and their molding, which of course they never take accountability for, but whatever. So very, very Anne Rice there, if you will. This Haven event was monthly, the second Sunday of every month in some dive bar downtown. And I would ask for like overnight passes from the group home that I was in order to attend these events. And I got to meet all the, nepotism in this subculture goes a long way. And I was fortunate enough to fall in with the higher echelons. I was asked by some of something like the three elders left in all of the city that I'm still on good terms with, not to name names, so I won't do that. But there are 3 or so individual families, houses with significant bloodlines. I don't really know how to explain some of this terminology. A lot of it just gets nebulous after a while, so I won't. And they have a particular degree of power, let's say, and respect that they command. Or maybe not respect as much as just clout, but they're very important people nonetheless. And I fell in with these people. If Sebastian Hoyt and Vincent Orion were at the top, let's say the progenitors, there's a second generation beneath them, and these people are the third. They come directly out of that second gen, so these are like big poppin' people. Surely they were teenagers at the time when Sebastian and them were still active in New York, but now they're like adults with their own families and are trying to create something a little bit better than what existed before. As to their success is debatable, but these are the people I fell in with. And gradually I got to meet Father Vincent Orion and other people. In September of 2016, I had been around this community long enough, and anyone who is active in any element of the so-called vampire community long enough will begin to hear any number of rumors and allegations and whatnot, innuendo about Sebastian Hoyt and his history. Particularly, there was an article from a blog coming out of South Africa that one could find, and between that and the things that my elders were telling me, I was more or less, convinced this man was the Antichrist. But being, a teenager in Gen Z, show, and not tell, I had to go find out for my own. And that, I don't know if I regret that now, but and of course, being a street urchin and a hoodlum, my thing was, I'm gonna pull up on this dude myself. And I did. I waited 6:30 p.m. at the Halloween store, which I wasn't working at yet. And I happened to see him leaving with some lady. I don't know who it was, doesn't matter. And I say, "Excuse me, are you Father Sebastian?" And he turns around, and when he saw me, now of course this man had no idea that I existed. So like, and again, I'm old in this like ratty outfit and whatever. And when he turned and saw me, like his eyes lit up. I'm like, oh God, what kind of target acquired thing did I just make the biggest mistake of my life? Um, and after a very convincing conversation, he suckers me into basically like hobnobbing with him for a while. He was leaving the state to go back home. He had already he was getting ready to come back the next month, but he actually put me in touch with some of his people who still reside in the state. That's a whole other story. It didn't go well, needless to say. And I felt very alienated by it. So transitioning into 2017, I was actually briefly homeless in the state of Rhode Island in Providence. I was sleeping on the campus of Brown University in the Manning Chapel building. When I came back to New York City twice, once to visit and once to stay. In March, I was brought down after, and I know that we were going to discuss this, so I'll save this maybe for later, but I had my first run-in with some of the higher echelons of the elders and a not so positive experience that lasted, for some time after. And then in April, my luck ran out in Providence and I was forced to return back to the city. When I got the job, I was employed at this particular costume shop. Now, and again, I won't name names, but again, people know where I'm talking about. This costume shop has a very odd, almost symbiotic relationship with the overall community. Working here became like a rite of passage, despite the fact that the place is miserable. Like I understand they're under new management now, so I'm going to try to be nice. But at the time, the owner was like this crotchety old guy in a Batman costume, like very racist and transphobic. We used to make jokes that we were on the plantation. That's how bad it was. And because he wore this big, hat, I don't know how to, it's not like a Stetson, like a cowboy hat, but it's, it was giving very roots from the head up anyway. Then the rest is like the Batman costume with the cape, but it's just absurd. And there was always this relationship with this costume shop because Sebastian and others had, produced their fangs and sold their wares there. And the boss really only tolerated them as far as, their money's green. But whenever the ghetto bats, as they had called us, because the uptown half of the subculture is very ethnically diverse and, well, frankly, ghetto as hell. Whenever we would bring our riffraff down past 96th Street, he was then none too pleased, and we get the boot and whatever, or go to the Cube and Astor Place, this sort of thing. So the mindset that I'm in is trying to appeal to this community. I'm in shock that the community actually still exists. I was giving updates to the girlfriend that I had up until she went whatever direction. To be frank, I actually don't even know where she is today, unfortunately. It was a very nasty breakup. Teenagers. So now it's like, I came into this to impress you, and now you're no longer here. Now I'm stuck in this thing that I don't understand, that is so complex and so exploitative, even if it's in its own right. And I had no choice. I said to myself, well, I'm going to write this out and I'm going to see where this goes. I'm working in the mask section of the shop. Halloween season comes, September to October. They're desperate. They'll literally hire anybody. They'll take they'll take a dolphin off the street if they really need to, and put you in a red smock if they have to. And I thought, trying to appeal to them and understand their history, well, if I work at this shop, that's my rite of passage and all sorts of things. And it was more like hazing. But the mask section is this big thing, and behind and whatever, this glass, display in front of me. And I'm working there, and Sebastian walks in. The building has 2 entrances, and Sebastian walks in from one entrance, and I'm just over here like, okay, oh. And he still notices me anyway, unfortunately. Calls me out and, hey, how are you doing? And this, that, and the other. I'm like, I'm fine, you know. And he's just trying to play off because he had an associate that sort of like, played me and stole some money and whatever, which again, vampire morality, stealing money from a homeless child. Think about that. It gets worse. And then he's like, he actually mentions it. Oh, I'm sorry about what happened between you and so. Let me make it up to you. Are you looking for a job? I'm like, well, I mean, I'm working here. No, this is crap. You don't need this. Why don't you come work for me? Okay. I'm 18 at the time, maybe 19. And he starts making all of these, these very high promises. I've seen some of you. I had a miserable little blog back in my angrier days. Arcane Ramblings of a Teenage Vampire. I know that just by having said that name, I've given whoever from the New York City community who's spying on this recording a heart attack, or an aneurysm. And it was essentially vampire muckraking. Like it was yellow journalism for a very red establishment, let's say. And I've seen your writing. You speak very eloquently. I have a book coming out, and I'd like for you to ghostwrite it. So he hands me this pre-order copy of this book called Black Veils, which is like in its 6th edition now, which is absurd that people are still paying for this. And I had just gotten kicked out from another place I was staying, and I was sleeping on the F train in Queens with this book and just a book bag of whatever belongings, toothbrush and razor. The book is a miserable little thing. It's white text on a black background. So I couldn't, take the ballpoint pen. So I went to Rite Aid in Jackson Heights, Queens, the last Rite Aid that was open at the time, so they've since gone under, and stole Post-it notes. Whole thing of Post-it notes. It was one of the big thick ones like this. And I think every time I go through my storage and people who are holding on to my things for me, I still find those stacks of Post-it notes 10 years later, or 8 years later rather. And I had to actually write the corrections on the notes and put them in the book, to the point where I wish I had the book to show you. I do still own it. It's in storage and I haven't been able to get to it. It looks like somebody's old prison Bible. Like it's a ratty, toe up little book with all of the Post-its coming out the top. It's ridiculous. And I did about 160 odd pages of this text, and I brought it to him, I don't know, about 2 or 3 months later. And he looked at me and he said, I knew I wasn't going to regret this. I was later told that he was moderately aware of me and was trying to pursue some kind of agenda or otherwise weaponize me against Gotham. And I'm more than sure that there's multiple people who will attest to that. I don't really know. I wouldn't put it past him, because as you can kind of tell, I have just as many criticisms for my local community as for Sabretooth. And as the years went on, that's basically how I fell in, not only with the local scene, that's also how I fell in with him. Before I go off on another tangent, I'll let you jump in there so we could get more specific details from that.
Yeah, did he pay you well for that?
No, God. Oh, that made my heart skip a beat, that question. No, this I have a reputation in the community for having a sailor mouth, so I'm actually on my best behavior today. But oh God, this crooked, he took advantage of the fact that I was a young person. He took advantage of the fact that I was homeless. Most ghostwriters, as I understand, get paid $10 per page. I believe I got paid about 60 cents per page, if we really put it together. He paid me the lump sum, which was about $100 some odd. I might still have the PayPal receipt someplace. And then he claimed that because he couldn't pay me in full, he was going to gift me one of the last, here's another terminology thing again. So the Ankhs that you see Sabretooth members wear, they call the Legacy Ankh D Edition, which is an absurd, ridiculous name. It gets in some kind of prior history that I know if I talk about, I'll get more angry messages. So we'll definitely get to that later. The D edition, we just call the Sabretooth Ankh because those first 2 generations I mentioned, that's what they were wearing. So this is the big round loop with the curved blade and the teeth on the side, the fangs on the side. Those are At the time, those were no longer made available because of a controversial history regarding the man who actually created that sigil. It was not Sebastian. And I've always had a squeamishness about it because I respect the fact that's before my time. I wouldn't want to wear that. Wearing that without having, earned it through the proper channels is the equivalent of going around like Hell's Angels and wearing a top rocker, which is the name of whoever, or a bottom rocker, which is the location, and then going into one of their bars. You're not coming out of there alive. Like, now, the vampires are not that violent, but they're gonna look at you, they're gonna ask where you got it from, and they may just take it from you. And I have to be honest, I think that that's justified because they have to. These are things that were earned, and this is a symbol that, as we would interpret the history, a man literally died for. If you're not supposed to have that, you shouldn't be wearing it. So there was this very uncomfortable conversation of, I have 3 left on my altar. I'm going to give you one. I'm going to send it to you in the mail. That never occurred. And now I understand that he is not only selling those again, the D editions. The smaller ones that he has is like an A edition, a B edition. The A edition is about this big. The B edition, I actually made earrings out of once upon a time, but they're that small. There's no C edition, curiously. I don't know why. And now he's even gone as far as to go and sell the old Sanguinarium onks, despite the Sanguinarium not existing anymore, because he feels that he has ownership over all of vampire history, regardless of how much he actually didn't achieve on his own.
So he understands that you're homeless. He gets you to write a big chunk of his book, doesn't pay you well, and doesn't even pay the full amount that he said he's going to pay, and wants to give you this emblem that has historical significance that would have been blasphemous to do so. Is that right?
Yeah, I feel that's an appropriate term. I don't think it's heavy-handed to say, I would have taken it just as, I'm either going to give it to somebody or I'm just going to have it on my altar, because I was housed more towards the end of that. I was housed from 2018 onwards, briefly. So, but I would have felt, it would have been, even now it's kind of uncomfortable. Like, it would have been literally nauseating for me to think of wearing it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how deep and how emotional the history gets for some people. And people love to weaponize my age against me. I'll mention that as well, where there's always this recurring thing of, whenever they don't have the critical means to actually address any valid criticisms of mine, the number one the rebuttal is always, well, you were too young, you weren't there. You're right. This is one thing I wasn't there for. I didn't earn that. I don't want it. For whatever he promotes in his books, personally, he's actually a big fan of barter. He's a very big fan of bartering. And I wasn't money hungry. I'm still not very, I don't consider myself a very money hungry person. Money does not do anything for me. I don't need to be paid to do certain things, so long as I know that whatever I'm being asked is something positive. So he would try to make these sorts of trades and agreements, knowing that I would have been fine with it. I got free copies of books. In 2019, I got free tickets to the Endless Night Vampire Ball, and there's photographs of that as well. There were certain particular benefits that came from the professional relationship that I had with him, and it wasn't as toxic, thank goodness, as some of other people's relationship dynamics with him. Now that I mentioned 2019, for example, I was working for him and he put in a good call for me to appear on this odd little program called Mysteries Decoded for the CW. It was this kind of docudrama, like a ghost hunters type of thing. It's me and the actress who plays Max's mom from Stranger Things, traipsing about in some graveyard looking for some mythological vampire. So it actually gave me this look like, oh, okay, he actually means what he says, which was one thing that the people in Gotham really weren't about. Like, they would tell me things, oh, we do care about you, we do want to help you, we do want to make a better community, and then they would never put their money where their mouth was. Sebastian actually tried, not consistently, of course, but he did try to make it seem like I was going to mutually benefit from an employment relationship with him. And that television program was one of the things where I had, seemed to benefit, because they still actually air this program to this day, and they've even uploaded the full episode to YouTube. I should have been dead by like 19, 20, 21, like, either dead or a statistic of some sort. So for this person to give this, queer Afro Latino, that he scraped off the subway, all of these wonderful opportunities where the very Black and Latino people of Gotham were not, I had to look at that and say, well, this guy is doing something for me. That's what I was tricked into believing. This guy is actually putting his money where his mouth is. He's actually helping me. What are you guys doing?
Hmm.
So far as that narrative of trying to turn me against the community, it was very successful because he wasn't even throwing money at me, or he wasn't buying my loyalty or these sorts of allegations or whatever. It was he. I hate to give credit like this, but it's kind of, he gave me things that I would never have conceived of. I've, to be on a plane to New Orleans to do a nationally syndicated television show, cable, but still television, where I wouldn't have thought of that in my wildest dreams, you know, and that came from this horrible, terrible human being, you know, and I had to take that. And as we get into the story, I had to kind of come to terms with that of I'm benefiting from what appears to be something transactional while I'm aware that all of this sort of, devilishment is going on. And I can't really say or do anything about it because there goes my meal ticket.
Yeah.
Once I was put in that position, I didn't know what to do. I was a child. I was a teenager. I was barely into adulthood, and this was the most craziness that I had ever been put up to in my entire life.
So he very clearly lured you in with all these promises. He gave you a taste of what it would be like to be close with him. And then we know, well, based on our conversations previous to this, that it went south pretty quickly and that you were privy to a lot of conversations and a lot of deviances that were going on behind the scenes. So let's get into that.
There was a particular intimacy that came with this working relationship with him. I have like insane call records. I swear I must have been on speed dial. It was a very much first name basis relationship with him. So when I got out of the group home and after a brief period of couch surfing, I did manage to get a place in the Hell's Kitchen section of Manhattan, Midtown, from about September 2018 to January 2023. That was when I was already working for him, and then some years after. And I remember spending so much time with this man on the phone because, of course, his business model is 11 months out of the year, he's not really doing anything. Like a lot of it just comes to plotting the Endless Night Ball, which is an enormous event, to be fair, to put together. And he mostly has, lackeys for that, essentially. I don't think he's actually put in the work for his own parties probably in like a good 10 years or so. There also used to be more of them per year. Now it's just the one. So 11 months out of the year, I'm assuming this guy is just like in his boxers lounging around watching Days of Our Lives or something. I don't know. And most of that free time he was spending on the phone with me. I have text messages, phone calls, this sort of thing. I have to be very honest. Sebastian is he's not an intelligent person. He critically lacks boundaries. That's one thing. Like he's very predatory in his actions, but once you get him to trust you, this man will tell you any number of things. The things that he's confided in me have been so disgusting that it was at this point I had kind of, begun to realize, oh my God, what have I done? Like, I'm really deep into it now. I don't know how I'm going to be able to live with this. I'm 20, 21, 22 years old, and I'm hearing absolutely lurid and abhorrent things about any number of concepts, any number of subjects. His racial views, his social views, his views on social class, his views on women. Everybody who wasn't not straight, but anybody who wasn't like a white upper middle class man was just prey to him. If we want to choose to couch it in the vampire ideology, this sort of predatory spirituality ideology that he puts forward, where the very negative part about an ideology like that is when you publish all these books and read all these texts that tell you that you are a sacred, mystical, apotheosis, evolved, supreme hammer, everybody else begins to look like nails. I remember being in a Rite Aid in Harlem on the phone, I'm picking up a prescription for an acquaintance. And you can see my face going through the motions of the absolute disgusting things that he's saying. And people are looking at me like, yo, you all right? No. At the time, this is a story a couple people, might still remember. I believe this was about 2020 or 2021. There was these two young ladies from the tri-state area, from the East Coast over here, who were essentially being groomed. Yes, I would call this, even though they were of age and whatever, now people are a little bit more discreet about their proclivities. Now they'll try to aim for someone 18, 19, 20, 21, just to skirt around the whole age of consent idea, while still kind of acknowledging that the mindset of these young people is still a very teenage mindset. So if you have a sick kind of frame of mind and you are, attracted to teenagers, the best bet you can get is to get with somebody in that age. I don't know how else to say it, and even saying it like that is just disgusting. But so there's these two young ladies from the area that he was grooming. One specific thing I remember was something about taking them, and there's still social media posts about this online, taking them to a racetrack somewhere upstate, go-karting or something like this, right? I had actually met one of these young ladies at the Endless Night 2018, which was something of a more discreet affair. I assume that they just continue to hang around him after that point. He has this, Sebastian has this, I don't know what you would call this kind of person. Let's say a liaison, right? This woman who lives in upstate New York. I was personally acquainted with her for quite a while. She has her own repugnant racial and social views. She's actually Afro-Latino like myself, but she has a terrible, disgusting view of our people and our community. She prefers to live amongst others. She got a big house. She has a vehicle and she has spare rooms. So when Sebastian would come to the East Coast to do business, instead of spending money on hotel rooms or whatever, he would stay with her. And I was given, back to the Rite Aid pharmacy story, he is describing in the most absurd and lurid detail a threesome that he's having with these two young ladies in, I don't know if it was the garage, man cave, whatever sort of situation that the woman had in her house. I'm being told that one of them is hanging from some apparatus bolted into the ceiling, and it's just, it was disgusting. And he is having a grand old time. So I think maybe he was getting off to my reaction or the lack thereof. Because again, I'm making faces, but I'm just on the phone, just dead silence. And you can hear the, Sabrina Carpenter music in the background and whatnot. And he's laughing hysterically. And then the worst part about this, he's bragging a particular point, which actually caused a degree of strife between these two, was that he was doing it while her school-aged children were home and upstairs. I don't know why that was something to be proud of, or that was something to laugh about. I don't know. That was one story out of only God knows how many. By this point in time, Black Veils had already been published. Anybody who wants to go and dig up the book, you could find, here's a trick, a little cheat code for people. Where you go to the front page and you see the special thanks, those were the ghostwriters. Everybody whose names you see there, those are people who contributed to the book because this man is too much of an illiterate to write his own works. But unfortunately, he's also very lazy, where he can find people to do the work for him and just kind of eschew any kind of responsibility out to the next party, while still maintaining this appearance of being the figurehead of his cult. There was one that was more concerning, particularly given my own ethnic background, that there is and I'm not in the business of kink shaming or whatever, to each their own. The vampire subculture here in Gotham, here in New York, did come out of the BDSM community. So each of us, including myself, has our own fair share of practices that we do in the privacy of our own bedrooms and whatnot. There is a concept I unfortunately became aware of recently called race play. I'll leave it to the viewers to look that up themselves. He has gone on, private conversations with me, speaking about how he gets off to having, he says, specifically black women in his bed, and basically, without again getting into the sort of nastiness and verbal descriptions, basically playing a master and slave role play dynamic, but not D and
Oh,
S as we understand. Yeah, it's like Roots type of blech. Like it's ridiculous, And he would tell me about. I even remember he sent me a picture, decent picture. It wasn't nothing crazy. But he sent me a picture of the woman he introduced. Told me who she was, and oh, I would love for you to meet her. And this, and I'm like, I think I'll pass. There were other condescending sort of comments he would make about Puerto Ricans, for example. I love Puerto Ricans. There's only 5 of them in LA, and they're all saber tooths and this sort of thing. And it was like, he had this very tone deaf. He's not an active racist. I divide racism into active and passive. Active racists are the ones burning crosses on your front lawn and whatnot. A passive racist is somebody who might be at the bar and has a little bit too much to drink and is like, hey, you N-words are cool now, right? And everyone else is, that's kind of the way he speaks. He does not use, to my knowledge, other people might have their own stories. He's never used, racial slurs or any kind of crazy terminology around me, but he does have a very condescending and a very backwards reactionary view towards people of color and women and various other groups. He has this predatory dynamic where black women and Latin men, twinks for lack of a better term, he likes to dominate these people. That's what led to a number of rumors. People were claiming that he had got up on me. I'm like, no, but I understand why. Because if people know how he was and how he is, it's easy to make that assumption, especially because of the close proximity of how I was working with him. There was another some kind of event, September 2019, where me and him were driven by this woman to Salem, Massachusetts, for some kind of new, and it's not a ball anymore. Now it's the Endless Night Vampire Salon and some nonsense like this. We hosted some kind of weird gala in the ballroom of the hotel in order to celebrate the launch of some new Ankh that he was releasing at the time, some other deviation of the Ankh. This is at the time when I said he was trying to get away from what they call the D edition because of the controversy about that. I do want to take a brief, moment to explain that in a way that won't have my DMs blowing up. The Ankh, the saber-tooth Ankh, or by whatever name it's called, was created by a black gentleman from Texas by the name of D. Drennan. He still writes about this man. You'll find him in like the back of the book obituary pages. The historical narrative that he promotes about D. Drennan is not accurate. They were not really buddy. D. Drennan took his own life in 2005. Another person who was exploited by Sebastian. He wasn't paid on time for his work, if he was paid at all. This, that, and the other. Had his own fair share of run-ins with Sebastian's racial views. There's a story that an elder here from New York City gives where he says something, again, he had a drinking problem back in the early days, about 2003 or so. And he says, why doesn't this lazy N-word have my shipment ready yet? So, for, the man was going through his own fair share of issues. And after he took his own life, what Sebastian ended up doing was they busted into the apartment, stole all of the jewelry equipment, whatever you call this sort of thing, including some of the prototypes and the molds for the original Ox. And he sold them for $100 each and pocketed the money.
Mm.
Now, and like I said, I know I'm going to get so much hate for, you weren't there. Shut up. It's the stories on the internet, for crying out loud. I don't know why people want to lynch me from the Liberty Torch. It's absurd. They really need to find some better scapegoat for their own problems. But where I'm actually involved in this is this particular story in Salem, because he claims, and I'm more than sure he'll try to throw up some receipt for like $200 worth to do. He claimed that all of the proceeds from the Ankhs that were being made were going to go to some suicide prevention charity or something to this effect. And that was his way of trying to make up, I suppose, for the whole thing with with Mr. De Drennan. There's a photograph that I have saved. There's a photograph of Sebastian hysterically sobbing at De Drennan's wake. And the picture is not mine, of course, someone else took this image. And on the top, there's a caption that says, "The price of friendship?" question mark, and the S in friendship is the dollar sign. I don't know who created that image. That image has been flying around the internet for literally decades now, but that kind of gives a sort of, idea of where money, capital, power, finance takes all sorts of precedent over any of Sebastian's personal and intimate connections, if he's even capable of making any. I'm not a psychoanalyst. I'm not going to sit here and try to self-diagnose the man, but this is history. I would welcome anyone who wants to dispute this. I will go toe to toe with anybody. I may have been, for those who want to talk about my age, yes, I may have been born yesterday, but I stood up all night. So, well, the Salem issue in and of itself, we were like in some cramped hotel room and him walking around with his dad bod and his boxers and whatever, blah, blah. Nothing is just ill, gross uncle, I guess. Little kitschy rituals. I know that the previous guests have had things to say about his rituals. It's really just a lot of psychodrama. The basic metaphysical foundation of his cult, or whatever we choose to call it, is largely just based in role playing and self delusion. There's an unfortunate undercurrent in his philosophy and his ideology that has largely been written out now. But if you go to older texts, Sanguinomicon, Vampire Magic, these were publications in the mid 2000s, you'll find quotes about the Church of Satan, the Temple of Set. You'll find in the bibliography a particular lurid text called "Might is Right" by Ragnar Redby. These are all Nazi related. People don't really tend to look into this kind of history. The Church of Satan had its own reactionary racist views. Michael Aquino of the Temple of Set used to perform rituals in Wewelsburg Castle in an actual Nazi uniform. Wewelsburg Castle was the castle in Bavaria where Heinrich Himmler used to perform his Thulian rituals. And Might is Right is essentially a eugenicist Darwinistic screed, ghostwritten by some man in the 1920s about how the white man has to wipe out all the other races and get into some kind of global conflict with the Jews in order to take over the planet. It's nonsense. It's absurd. But you see this manifest in the vampire ideology, where it is essentially Darwinist, at least in its social sense, because there's the predator and prey. There's the sort of class conflict that he promotes indirectly. There's his own personal views on race and class, and all of this manifests in these works. The culture in and of itself is very bourgeois. I wouldn't say that it's white, but I remember one person laughing because he said, that the vampire preferred sport of choice is squash. I'm like, Sebastian, do you even play squash? Like, do you even know what that is? Like, you don't look healthy enough for that, like, it's absurdity because it's trying to graft onto this kind of European nobility type of thing, but it's completely incompatible with what we understand as, quote unquote, American values, democracy, and all the rest. This isn't a political podcast, so I won't get into that, but it's like, without getting too nebulous or philosophical, you have to try to understand how this affects people on an individual level, where if you're grabbing his books and you're reading them and you are taking this kind of information, or taking this, information into yourself, but taking this identity onto yourself, what that identity is comprised of and how it allows people like him to do the craziness that they do. There's this aspect in the books. I know I tend to go in circles. I try to land eventually. There's been this long-standing controversy about the metaphysics in his texts, which are largely lifted from, like I said, Church of Satan, Temple of Set, this one organization called Temple of the Vampire, which also, by the way, people don't know, has a Revelations type of text that says that all of the ascended vampires are going to come back and they're going to literally engage in a human genocide. They're going to eat or feed on, or whatever term, all of the humans on the planet, and they're going to go colonize other planets because they're incorporeal entities. So they've ascended past the physical limitations of the human body, and they're going to be like spooky space vampires and go planet hopping on some kind of fascist Star Trek fantasy. People who write these things, you could kind of see why I gravitated away from some nonsense. But there is an entity that the Strigoi, however they choose to pronounce it, cult devotes itself to. Now, the general saber-tooth ideology or saber-tooth organization devotes itself to called Elleroth. And it's been long known that Elleroth is, he's made every number of excuses under the book, that it's Enochian, that it's Atlantean, that it's this, that. Elleroth is an acronym for Eternal Lord, Our Regent, Aaron Todd Hoyt, which is his government name, Aaron Todd Hoyt. Elleroth is essentially worshiping him. So when there's 150 people in a room, as I was, the so-called high priest, or the Ramket as they refer to. Remember how the previous ladies said a Ketra? There's 3 rows. There's the Mradu, which is the warrior. The Ramket is the priest, and the Ketra is some kind of submissive role. I really doesn't hold up under scrutiny, but there's 150, 200 people in a room all chanting Hail Elleroth, and understanding the, let's call the mechanics, or as they would say, the technology behind his rituals. He is essentially feeding off of these people. I don't know how many individual Trigger V practitioners there are. I don't know if there's really, some emo kid, 15 years old in, Mississippi somewhere reading this book and really doing a whole Hell Elderoth thing in his mother's basement. But every person who devotes their energy to that, you're essentially vicariously worshiping Sebastian. So where a lot of people bristle at the idea of, is Sabretooth Clan a personality cult devoted to Sebastian? Yeah, it is. And you have the books right there to show you, and I would know because I wrote half the damn book,
Because I wrote it.
It's right, and we've discussed these things. And he asked, the other one thing I forgot to mention is another predatory, behavior that he has towards people of color is that a lot of us come from spiritual backgrounds that are what they call closed systems, Santeria, for example, these sorts of things. And what he'll do is he'll try to pilfer from other schools of thought in order to incorporate that into whatever kind of eclectic system that he's trying to turn vampirism into a religion, into a functioning cosmology, which you can't, because you basing it off of fiction, role play, psychodrama. I actually have very serious doubts as to whether the rituals work or not, or if it's some just kind of collective self-delusion. I think that they've been doing this for so long at this point that they actually have convinced themselves that these rituals have any kind of real power. I know that the power is mostly, internal or deceptive, where they are essentially brainwashing themselves into creating this paradigm and trying to manifest it as real. They know, a lot of people, myself included, everybody knew that this was largely just Vampire the Masquerade with some woo stuff mixed in. But they have tried to convince themselves that it's real for whatever personal reason. Being a, Gen Z, I want to bring up a very silly comparison. There's an episode of SpongeBob from the very early seasons where they're playing a game, a board game, with a pirate map. And Mr. Krabs, all greedy and whatever, he wants to be a real pirate. And they go and he gets a real ship and makes them into pirates or whatever. At the end of the episode, they sneak into his cabin and they find that the pirate map is the game board taped to a piece of parchment. If that isn't basically the easiest understanding of the vampire community in essence, I really don't know what is. And people hate when I make that comparison. Yeah, that's what this is. And Sebastian himself and a lot of his peoples are they're so deep now that they can't give it up. He can't come forward and say, I'm sorry for everything I've done. Everything I taught you was lies. Go about and move on with your lives. Because people would literally probably riot. Well, maybe not. There's not that many of them. But it would be very psychologically debilitating to a lot of people who have made this entire paradigm their whole life. Not a lifestyle. They've really made it their whole life. And they have nothing outside of this, including, like I said, including myself. I'm still trying to process and trying to become my own person. Now, almost at the age of 30, I'm 28 now, because I got sucked into this at so young that it really just, it became all encompassing. And trying to escape from that, not everybody was really prepared for that kind of shock. We really thought that this was a real thing, that this was just going to go on forever.
Yeah, it sounds like he's just plagiarized from a lot of different sources and created a religion out of it. And he's creating these seances or these events, or, we've talked about them at length with some of our previous guests. and Ashra and Casa and also Rachel. And he's taking advantage of the whole situation. It's basically a money grab. He's exploiting people for labor. He is SAing people. All of the things that you can think of that could go wrong, it seems like has gone wrong. And so what you're saying is within all of that, people have really taken it in as truth. And that's where that deviation comes from versus just having a spiritual practice and just really enveloping everything that he is selling, buying everything that he is selling, which is just regurgitations of other things and bastardizations of other things that he's created.
What I would say, I would define it is because again, I can only speak from the New York perspective, even though I do have experience, briefly, days or weeks at a time in other locales. In New York City between about 98 and 2005, it was real here. Like it was an everyday in your face, day or night type of thing. Like people walking around with fangs, with ankhs. I'm 28 years old and I walk around my ankh and the first question people ask me is, "Oh, do you remember so and so?" Different names and whatever of certain groups that were out there because their parties and their events were very well known even amongst the so-called mundanes, the outside, of the community. That epoch, if you will, is over. Sebastian went to LA, Drennan passed away, Father Vincent, stood out here, holding it down here, trying to hold it down up until his untimely passing 2 years ago. And basically ever since then, and really, over the last decade and a half or so, the community has just been stultifying. You can only reinvent the wheel but so many times, and these people have failed to really modernize or keep up with the time. And that's why the vampire lifestyle no longer has the appeal. Like earlier when I was explaining about hip hop, whatever, they had an opportunity to export this culture and to really become a foundation rather than becoming a brand. When they became a brand, you still had that opportunity at least to commercialize it, but even in the case of Black Veils, that book that he's selling is the exact same book that me and others came together to ghostwrite however many years ago. He's up to like the fourth or fifth edition now. All it is a different cover. It comes with some cool little flashy jewelry, which I'll admit it looks nice. I wouldn't pay for it, but the book is exactly the same. If you republish the exact same book over and over and over, and nothing else is coming out, you're basically admitting there's nothing left. There's nothing to create. There's nothing left to steal from. There's no cultural trend to ride on. It's dead. It's over. Pack up your toys and go home.
So, what was the moment then that you realized, even if it meant your entire identity crumbling and even a safety net in sometimes real and physical ways, how did you decide to leave? What made you decide to leave?
I'll start with one and the other because Gotham was just always concurrent to a lot of this stuff. I can't say membership, but my interaction with Gotham or whatever. But I ceased working with Sabretooth. I ceased working with Sebastian because I still have the contract somewhere. I know I'm violating some NDA somewhere. I could care less. But I stopped working with him November of 2021, I believe. There was some hurricane that year. I believe it was Irene that had washed away the homes of some of the people that he had in his halo, which is like his little courts in New Orleans. Those people were actually holding it down for him more than he could ever hope to appreciate. Like, these were people who they knew the monster that he is and always has been, but the idea of what Sabretooth was, or what we conceived it to be, as to be that family, that community, like it brought people together. These people started families. They were married with kids and this sort of thing. It meant more to them than it could ever possibly mean to him. So I saw the news. In fact, the one of the people, I actually spoke to earlier today, they were lucked out. They packed up their things and they moved somewhere up, in the country. I hit up Sebastian and I called him on the phone, or I texted him. I think I was texting him, one on one, and I had said, Gotham, the New York City community, I started a GoFundMe to help these people out. And people here are broke. Like, it's New York City. It's an ethnically diverse community. Like, everybody is, people are gonna hate me for saying, but like, these people are broke. Calling themselves lord and lady. A lord owns land. You don't even own your furniture. That's why you bug out whenever Rent-A-Center knocks at the door. You do the Jehovah's Witness. Everybody, shh. Nevertheless, these people came together to do this for an aspect of the community they claim to despise. Gotham claims to despise Sabretooth. They hate Sebastian, everything he stands for, while still vicariously carrying on his quasi-libertarian philosophies. But I said, hey, you're going to pitch into the GoFundMe? And he rambles off into this kind of nonsense about picking oneself up by their bootstraps. I'm like, bro, their house washed away. What are you talking about? Like, I was livid. I was heated. I was disgusted. I slammed the phone on him. I had cracked the screen of my phone. I slammed the phone on him, which is unnecessary because they're smartphones, but whatever. And I went on this whole tirade. I had been minoring in sociology briefly. I went on this whole thing about like race relations in the community and how there was always this kind of exploitative hierarchy that he played a major part in. There was another court called Court of Lazarus, which he started and then was like kicked out of or something. There was never any proof of this. I've been asking for paperwork for years, and the regent went and blocked me. So that should tell you all you need to know. Court of Lazarus was that white bourgeois element. Court of Lazarus is actually where the term that I had used earlier, ghetto bat, came from. Ghetto bat was a slur. Ghetto bat was an insult for either the vampires that were actually Black and Latino from uptown, or at least the ones who just acted like them or who patronized their events. So everybody had the fangs and the ankhs or whatever, but Sebastian and the Court of Lazarus and these kind of groups, they wouldn't want to deal with the like the whole Tommy Hilfiger Oprah kind of rumor. I don't make my wares for those people. Those people, sort of, statements and whatnot. And Court of Lazarus, which fortunately for the Gothic community petered out finally after a long time waiting earlier this year. And I wanted to throw a crossing garlic on the outside just to make sure they don't get back up, but whatever. They were that rigid element of we're better than you. Everyone's seen the Twilight meme of the Vampyre standing at the banister looking down on people. That's what Lazarus was. And when the actual white Caucasian element began to leave, then it was just like light-skinned Latinos. They wanted to think that they were, upwardly mobile, or this sort of thing. There is a term in Spanish I can use, but it's still a swear word, so I don't want to get caught on the YouTube thing. But and it was just all negative. It was just all very derogatory. It was just very divisive, and it really started with him. It started with him, and it started with what he was trying to create and what he eventually succeeded in creating. Because I don't really care, and I'll say this, for the whole world to see. I don't care how many token people of color, including myself, he tried to put up there, to pass it off as some kind of diverse organization, because the roots are still tainted. It's still based in this kind of, the vampire community is not racist. I'm not going to go and make, absurd, broad accusations like that, but it is very reactionary. It's very backwards. It's stultified. It does not have a culture of its own, because the culture is role playing as some kind of blue blood noble. And you can't do that when you come from Podunk, Mississippi. Like that doesn't jive well. That doesn't mesh together. It doesn't make sense. So number one, those articles that I was writing, these were articles. It was on Facebook and crap, but it was like paragraphs and paragraphs and proof and evidence of, people telling stories, and I'm drawing from their experience where nobody could question it. Even Father Vincent himself was like, oh, who pissed in your Wheaties this morning? Like, oh, okay, because everybody had this negative view towards Todd, Sebastian. So anyone attacking him, as a pat on the back. But this was not that. There's something more to this. What are you going on about? And I'm like, well, you guys are looking at him as this vampire cult leader, whatever. I'm understanding the more metastasized evil. Maybe not evil. I didn't say that as a compliment, but the negative element, the force that he has become in this community, where there is nothing positive that could come out of an ideology like this. People have tried to reinvent the philosophy. There was an author some years ago, Michelle Bellinger. She wrote the Psychic Vampire Codex, and she was trying to use like appeals to nature to try to write the vampire as they understood it into some kind of like a filter feeder type of it wasn't very flattering in a way. Like you can't make a parasite look good. That doesn't, you can't throw some red velvet on a bed bug and still allow it into your house. I'm more than sure nobody would be privy to do that, of course. So I basically went off on these tangents, and he had the nerve to call me because he still had me on the Facebook, whatever. So he's seeing all this stuff. And I remember the very last text I ever got from him was, "What's going on?" And I blocked him right after that. And I've not heard from him since that time. I don't think I've run into him. He no longer works in the city. He no longer comes to the East Coast. I don't remember when's the last time, sometime before COVID, he stopped coming out here. They sold the Fang shop to some other person. So he no longer makes Fangs in that costume shop in Union Square. And he's just like blacklisted almost, and largely because of his own actions, because he stopped being welcome here probably in like 2006. Like I was I was like in the second grade, like it's been that long. And he would still try to weasel his way in and try to come around and make money. And many of the hypocrites in the Gotham community will still patronize his events and even buy his books, which is absurd because everyone knows or claims to know the monster and the predator that he is. So why are you bankrolling his next victim? It's absurd to me. And I've said this to people who have teenage daughters, but once again, you have this kind of negative street type of mindset of it's not your sister, it's not your daughter, it's not your wife, so you don't care, it's not your problem. And that's really what led to him becoming the monster that he is today, because everybody turned a blind eye, including myself. For everybody had their worries. For me, I didn't have a choice. I was homeless. I still struggle with housing insecurities. The local community has pretty much all but sold me out. I'm still going through a lot of struggles. I have a number of health issues. I was attacked, in a what I call a religiously motivated hate crime some years ago that left me partially disabled. My life has not really benefited from interaction with this community, and worse so, trying to turn it into something positive. You cannot take a community based on predation, and try to turn it into something positive. It doesn't work. The overall community, I've had difficulties reconciling from the metaphysical perspective for years, and when I stopped trying to reinvent the wheel myself, I realized I could not take the vampire as we understand it, the vampire as archetype, and turn it into something positive. I began branching out, discovering my own roots and whatnot. I discovered, different traditions. I've actually been very heavily into a school of Buddhism they call Vajrayana, which appeals to people who come out of these kind of communities, because that's the one where you see like the masks of the fangs like this and the creatures wearing, the blades and whatnot and all those kind of tantric deities. So the reason why they look like that, they're not monsters. What it is, they're trying to scare humanity straight onto the straight path. And they also take on that warlike persona because they're defending the innocent from the demon that they call Mara, illusion. These people are not that. The vampire is the monster who embraces illusion. The entire community is based on a collective delusion. So I had to find something that took me out of this negative and bring it positive.
Yeah, and figure out what resonates with you now, and what is it that brings you peace and joy and any sort of feeling of identity now that you're out of the community?
I've been inactive since Father Vincent Orion's passing. That was January 2023. That was also when I lost my apartment that I was sharing with a roommate. A lot of the community things that I was speaking about, like I fed people, I clothed people, I sheltered. I did all the things that my upbringing and my culture showed me was the right thing to do. I didn't complain about it. I never asked for anything in return. I did the right thing, not because someone told me to, but because it was the right thing to do. And a lot of people, including Father Vincent himself, appreciated that. When I tried to bring that mindset into Gotham, it was like I was speaking Chinese to them. They couldn't understand it. They love to pass themselves off as a community and claim that that's what they are. But even Vincent himself understood that that was not the case. One thing that I had been told recently was they're a scene. They're not a community. And any attempt to build such out of a scene is bound to fail. And we've seen that since his passing, because he was the one that kept everything together. Remember, he was Sebastian's, co-partner in developing Sabretooth and the Sanguinarium and whatnot. When he passed, which was very unexpected, he wasn't sick or anything. It was just, oh, okay, that was it. We're still in shock. Like, the scene is in shambles right now. There's all kinds of power plays. There's some illegitimate individual running around claiming to be the new king, and all sorts of people propping up this nonsense. And it's like, what happened to his dream? What happened to his legacy? What happened to, because see, you can't come into a vampire community and talk about humanity. It's incompatible. And they've lost touch with the meaning of community and family in the process.
So then what is it for you that makes you feel authentic and joyous?
Well, when Father Vincent was still alive, there was a plan at one point that we did want him to kind of take power in the Gotham scene again. And unfortunately, he passed away before that plan could come to fruition. What he had picked me for, essentially, was he understood that me being my age and having my experiences, I could speak to the people out there. So remember when I had mentioned back in, the library and the rooftops on Vice Avenue, all the young kids and that whole Forsaken Primordial thing, we decided to actually bring Primordial back to kind of follow in his footsteps and carry on his legacy, not in like the Vampire King of New York type of thing, because that's not the man that we knew. That's not the man that I knew. I didn't know him as an elder. I didn't know him as a vampire. I knew him as a mentor and as a friend. When I was homeless on the streets, like, he held my property. So when they were, the typical routine, someone passes away and all the vultures start circling and whatnot. They're going through all of his belongings. They did the very same thing they did to the Drennan. Everybody ran into his apartment, stole all kind of stuff. They find a big black and red military book bag, and they open it up and they find a birth certificate and a social security card. And they look at the name and they bug out, why is his personal details here? People was running around thinking I was secretly his child or something. It was ridiculous. I don't know. They probably still have it, opening up credit cards in my name. Good luck with that. My credit score is only 2. And that was the sort of thing that he did for me. And that's the sort of thing that he did for a lot of other young people coming up in the community. He was a mentor. He was a role model. He really embodied what community and family really meant in a way that I could understand and resonate with from the background that I came from. He was not a hip hopper. He wasn't a house head. He wasn't, all that was alien to him, even though he grew up concurrent to that. But he understood the universalism behind that. You always want to do what's right. We had that natural inclination to do so. Now, I'm personally too in a bind in my personal life to go back to what I was doing in Hell's Kitchen, for example. But once I get my life back on track, I intend to go and do the very same things in order to make him proud. So far as the vampire community is concerned, he is not my sire. I am not his childer. I'm not in his house, in his bloodline, whatever. I have no tangible connections to him in a way that they acknowledge. But he gave me, and a lot of young people, a lot of my brothers and sisters, my comrades, let's say, he gave us something that the Gotham community could never give us, and that was hope.
Yeah. So you still didn't answer my question, Vincent. I'm trying to figure out how you're doing now.
Awful.
What? You're not doing well?
Unfortunately, no. I'm still, after the hate. So the hate crime had occurred in 2022. It left me with all kinds of injuries. I actually can't see out of this eye. So and if I look closely, you see I have this, the stitches and whatnot. It's an orbital issue. It left me with all kind of like debilitating injuries and whatnot. So I'm obviously unemployed. I lost the place, the apartment we used to call the Temple, where I was helping all these young people. And the community has not been forthcoming in trying to help me in any meaningful sense, really, because I've come to understand it's a spite thing. They want to, I did the ugliest thing that I ever could have done, I realized. And you could, anyone who knows anything about me or who could ask, I have this terrible history, the Arcane Ramblings blog. I used to do these awful, awful Facebook Live. I used to come for these elders and call them out their names and say all kind of awful, disgusting things about them and attack them online. I was a child. I was a petulant, angry child, and they didn't realize that they were the ones who made me that way. The old African proverb: the child will burn down the village to feel its warmth. that really went over their heads. And I'm no longer that person today. I had to, do a lot of growing up to get past that. But what I did was I took very valid criticisms and they ignored me. So what I did was all the ugliest thing I could ever have done. It wasn't kind of insults. It wasn't cursing, carrying on. If anything, that's most of them doing that right now. There's this whole Facebook slander campaign against me. The ugliest thing I could have ever done to so-called vampires was I held up a mirror to them and they could not stand the reflection they saw, because I said, none of you are really doing anything community wise. None of you are doing anything the way that Father Vincent would have wanted. He would have cursed out all of us, probably slapped a couple of us around at this point. What are you doing? What's wrong with you? What happened? He's no longer here, though. So it gives people carte blanche to just make excuses and do whatever, so long as it feeds their egos, their agendas, and their narratives. I've been couch surfing. I, have been trying to get into, the New York City shelter system in a location that, has medical accommodations for my needs. That has been a long process. Everybody in the community more or less just kind of washed their hands of me because they got tired of the criticism. They got tired of me constantly saying or asking the question, what are you doing? What are you doing for people? And don't necessarily do it for me. Do it so that the next homeless 16-year-old that wanders into your community doesn't end up like me. I can get on my feet with help or without, and I'll be fine, hopefully. But I would be so disappointed to see another young person come into this community as lost and as desperate as I was at that time, and to be used, to be exploited, to be played, and then to be cast into the gutter the way that I was. And I try to do everything in my power to bring life back to that dream. When I get on my feet and get my own place or whatever, I'm going right back to doing what I was doing before. I was housing 6 to 8 people, sleeping on couches or whatever. I was going out feeding, these people clothing, whatever, because again, the homelessness issue, particularly amongst youth of color in New York City, is wild and disgusting. And like I said, they don't care as long as it's not their kids. But the problem is that child is still somebody's child. You should care because that's a child.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that you were in a difficult position when you were a kid. You stumbled into this. You were, maybe groomed is the right word, but you were molded into this community. And when all was said and done, you tried to help make changes or try to at least draw attention to things that needed to change. You were outcasted. You chose to speak out. And now, because of that, you've lost your community and you've lost everything that you've been so invested in for so many years. And you don't have that community to fall back on. And so you're in the process of finding what it is that you can get yourself back into, get yourself back on your feet, and try to find that sort of peace and semblance, because that old life no longer serves you. Does that sound right?
I mean, they certainly let me down, abandoned me. I was made just as many false promises in Gotham as Sebastian Todd had made for me, if not more so. But I had to choose to walk away when I came to a very startling and a very debilitating realization that I gave these people 10 years of my life that I would never get back, and I have nothing to show for it. When I had mentioned coming back from Providence, Rhode Island in 2017, the reason I came back in March for a week was because I had attended the Haven event, which at that point had become a court, which was a very short-lived thing. And I was announced as a prospect for a very prestigious house by the elder who now is running around claiming to run things. And that man was probably 15 years or so, probably a little bit more, my senior. I was a couple months shy of my 19th birthday. This man was about 34, 35. And I was basically being groomed sexually by this man up until about September of that same year. And then one thing I forgot to mention, which kind of tie all this stuff together, is this tremendous, the popular term today, Stockholm syndrome. I made excuses for these people for years. I always hoped and prayed that they would get their act together. I used to promote my own personal agendas and narrative. I'm not innocent of that either. I tried to take Gotham and deny the reality of what it was in order to promote an image of what we would have liked it to be. But what the elder class, what the self-proclaimed elder class, the self-appointed elders, do not have the desire to really create. They want to talk about it. They don't want to do it. There were elders who were aware that I was of the situation, that I was being groomed. The grooming had more or less continued for a few years after. I still had sexual liaisons with this gentleman as recently as 2023, the month after Father V passed away. This guy finds himself coming to my apartment in Hell's Kitchen. I was still there in February. I hate to dignify by calling it hooking up, but and the dude was engaged in the whole nine. It's like, this is how you look at me. This is how you've always looked at me, because that's what the vampire mindset is. You look at me like a piece of meat. There's an elder who I have a great amount of respect for. She'll probably know who she is if she's listening. I know she don't like me very much. That's fine. I still give her my heart because she went to bat for me. She, according to a story I was told, like always, way after the fact, she went to bat for me and she scolded this elder, called him out by his government name and said, "What's wrong with you? We don't do those things no more." And what she meant by that was, again, I kind of tried to skirt around it because I don't want to make people sound a lot worse than it really is. But there was a long-standing history of sexual exploitation within the overall community that was promoted by the same philosophies and ideologies in those days, coming out of the club scene and the vampire scene within the clubs, where there were minors walking around. And when it happened to her 20 odd years ago, she was 13 years old. And she didn't want to see the same thing happen to me or anybody else. And she has done the work, and she runs her own event now. Very successful party. It's a party. It's because we understand that we need the social element as much as the serious and strict, rigid, courtly type of thing. And her parties are enormously successful. They're always, they're very popular, and there have been no controversies or anything coming out of there because she won't allow it. She is now a mother. She has teenagers of her own. She is not a victim. She's a survivor. And I look up to her and the way that she runs. She is a true elder. The movement that me and my brothers, my friends from the block, I started the whole primordial thing. We actually base our movement off of her. She calls it a tribe. This is a house, just a different terminology, because we would be fortunate to have even a fraction of what she has, because she doesn't have that sort of vampire house sort of scene-ish type of thing. She has a family, and all of us in these countercultures, regardless of what hip-hop, vampire house, club kids, skaters, we've all been looking for family, and we've been looking for those people who could provide that for us. And if you can't be provided it, you have to go out there and you have to build it yourself. That's what she did. That's what I'm trying to do. The movement is called Primordial NYC. And the irony is we have more members outside of the state than in the city. So I don't know if we got to change the name now or something, but we have members in Nevada. We have members in Connecticut, Florida. We even have supporters in other countries. I've had people hit me up from the Middle East, from Japan, from South Africa, offering support because we took the community and the family element, the dream that Father V believed in, far more than any vampire gobbledygook, and we decided to do what our real elders did, which was to take this culture, to take this foundation and spread that all around the world, export that. Not a culture, not a commodification, not commercial. I'm not selling jewelry. I'm not selling angst you could buy for $100. We're trying to inspire real, true community.
Yeah. How can people support you?
We have a website, the WordPress blog. It's under construction. I don't have the means to work on it because I haven't had access to a desk. I don't have a desktop or a laptop computer. I wish I did. It would make this whole, transience thing kind of easier. The best way that people can kind of support outside of, the rinky dink, people want to, donate or visit a website. I think the best thing that people can do is just try to do that on their own. Wherever you are in the world, wherever you are in the country, try to give back to your community. Try to find people. There should not be any children, teenagers homeless on the street. There should not be people selling their bodies or getting into drugs or these sorts of things. We weren't always just, teenagers just hosting each other in an apartment. We went out to food banks. I was trying to, it didn't go very well because I'm not good with paperwork. We were trying to actually get a program started to mentor juvenile delinquents. There's a juvenile correction facility in the Bronx, which we were trying to basically network with the people there so that while they were in there, we would go into the facility and speak to the young people there and then give them help and assistance to get back into the real world when they were eventually released, back to work program, back to school programs, drug treatment programs, because we didn't want to just talk about it. We wanted to do it. We wanted to put
Yeah.
a little bit of money we had, we wanted to put it where our mouth was. And then we had the kind of aesthetic, I mean, I have the mommy. I wasn't going to throw them on. We still do the fangs and the jewelry and a lot of the other stuff. I don't call myself a vampire. The nickname I ended up picking up on the street, they call me the Goblin. I have no idea where this name came from. So I just rocked with it. But so, okay, that's the Goblin. Go talk to the Green Goblin. He'll tell you what you need to do, and this sort of thing. So we developed this kind of street reputation of, those brothers and sisters out there, they're really about it. They want to do it. If we could
Yeah.
bring back the true spirit of family, the way that, the Zulus had, the way that Gotham once had it when Father Vincent was here, if we can even just bring a fraction of that just in our own little corner of the world, I would be happy and I would find fulfillment in that. I find my happiness in helping others. I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through. And it's because there were people who believed in that for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Vincent. You've shed quite a bit of light on all of this and a totally different perspective that we haven't seen before. And I guess the last thing I need is your Linda Listen moment.
Listen, Linda, it's really not as hard as you're making it. Yes, a lot of us today are suffering, the country and the politics and the economy and the this and that, sure. But what's the difference between then and now? Back then, we had just as few resources, but we had something strong. We had hope and we had faith. We knew what was the right thing to do. Why can't we do that now? If we get ourselves together and do something really, truly positive in the way that all of our elders and forebears knew that we could, we might just be able to not just change the city we live in, we could change the world.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you for coming on, Vincent, and sharing.
Definitely, of course.
Do you have a website right now that we can link?
Yeah, it's because you can't Google it because I don't know why the insights suck. It's primordialnyc.wordpress.com.
Okay, perfect. We'll link that in the description. And do you have any final thoughts before we go?
For too long, a lot of us have encouraged an environment where people stood to be harmed. And I can no longer be a part of that. There's a lot of other people who are trying to gravitate away from this and are having just as much difficulty moving away from this as me because they've spent just as many years in this scene as I've been alive. So I can understand that it must be doubly and triply harder for them as it is for me. But I do believe that there is hope. I didn't come up here to be spiteful. I didn't come up here to malign people and slander them the way that they're doing to me right now and will likely continue to do. All we want to do is see a better community, regardless of where you come from, what subculture, what community. Everybody wants to see something better. But you can't just talk about it. You have to do it.
I agree. Well, I appreciate you coming on despite the threats that you received just for commenting on our videos. We really appreciate you being here. And guys, if you're watching, thank you so much. Leave those words of encouragement down below for Vincent. It means a lot to us, to our guests, to boost the algorithm. If you want to support further, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We have some merch at cults2consciousness.com. If you like this video, you are definitely going to want to check out Rachel, Ashra's, and Kasa's videos. We will link 2 of them down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.